Roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call for the Joint Corporations Committee for October 13th. Senator Boner.
Here.
Senator Case.
Present.
Senator Nethercutt.
Here.
Senator Scott.
Here.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Burt.
Here.
Representative Clausen.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer.
Here.
Representative LeBeau.
Excuse, she's running late.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Representative Roscoe.
Here.
Chairman Driscoll.
Here.
Co-Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. First up this morning will be telecommunications, Bill Draft 23 LSO 0128. We've got staff to present, I assume. It says. Go ahead.
No.
Welcome, Josh.
Good night.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor.
Josh Anderson, LSO. This is 23 LSO 128. If you remember, we walked through a version of this bill up in Casper at our August meeting. At that time, the bill was 21 pages. And after discussion, then the committee requested that the bill be revised to just extend the sunset date. And that's all this bill does, Mr. Chairman. Now, so on page 2, you'll see it changes the sunset date from July 1 of 2023 to July 1 of 2025. It also just deletes a related date that could also be extended, but to me, it looked like it would be easier just to delete it, so it wouldn't have to be continually updated if this sunset date was extended another time. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Anderson? Questions for Mr. Anderson? Okay, thank you. Do we have any other testimony on the bill? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. I'm here representing Lumen today, which most of you know primarily as CenturyLink. With me today, I have Tim Kunkelman. We just have a few comments on the bill as a follow-up to our conversation with the committee in Casper back a couple of months ago. And I just preface it by saying one of the requests of the committee was for the industry to get together and talk about potential amendments to the bill. We've had one conference call. We've had a series of emails back and forth. And ultimately, I'll let the colleagues in the industry speak for themselves. But Lumen remains committed to doing something with this act that brings it a little bit more into the century that we're living in. And with that, I'd just turn it over for some basic comments from Mr. Kunkelman. I do have an amendment that looks very akin to what we talked about in the October, or the, when that was September meeting. And I do have copies if the committee so desires, but I'll let Mr. Kunkelman explain where we're headed with that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for letting us have a chance to talk today and for all the work that you've all been doing on this. Again, my name's Tim Kunkelman. I work for Lumen. As Mr. Pickard said, many of you probably know us better as CenturyLink. We're still working on that name change. It's only been a couple of years, so maybe one day we'll get there. You know, it's really our belief and opinion that it's time to just sort of move along on many of the things that the commission oversees in the telecom space. And let me preface it by saying it has nothing to do with the commission itself. They're great people over there, and they do a lot of great work. It's really just trying to catch things up to what this environment looks like now. They oversee a state high cost fund. I think the projection for this upcoming fiscal year is about $1.6 million, which is a significant less amount than what broadband money is coming to the state. So not only what the state has put in terms of some broadband support, but the federal government is handing over incredible amounts of money to the states, and Wyoming should see, I would think, at least a couple $100 million, certainly $100 million, but I do think that number will climb closer to 2. And so we're working on those kinds of things. We're trying to build fiber to every business and every home that we can, and I know that my competitors are doing the same. And so out of respect for my competitors, we feel that rather than maybe upset the apple cart too much and go with a sunset of this, that it's at least a reasonable request to allow for some sort of an opt-out of some of the oversight. My company has 3 entities here that operate in Wyoming. My largest one, CenturyLink QC, the old Quest US West entity, has actually already gone through the deregulation process. So it's just a couple of the entities that we have left, and one of those does receive some state high cost fund money. And so it'd be our opinion that if you could no longer accept those dollars, that you could then opt out of some of the other oversight that exists for the commission. And this wouldn't be opting out of requirements and obligations that the federal government has for telecommunications carriers to interact with each other, to do your interconnection agreements, to pay your fees that are required, whether it be for 911, whether it be for high cost fund, assisted telephone service, those sorts of fees. We're not talking about those kinds of things. We're just talking about some of the general oversight that the commission has on a regulated telephone company. And again, I think our thought is we're moving beyond telephone, and we're squarely in broadband, and so that was kind of the compromise we were hoping to strike. So rather than maybe just do an entire sunset, which might have some other ramifications and require maybe some additional efforts that maybe we're not quite ready for based on what's coming down from the federal government, but nonetheless, we feel that it would at least be a reasonable compromise to have some sort of an ability to say, I don't want to take that money anymore from the state, and allow for some relaxed regulation of again the telephone service that we're talking about. So I again appreciate your time. I do appreciate my competitors' time as well. I thought we had some good conversations, and I got some good feedback from them, and I appreciate that. So with that, I'll take any questions that you all might have.
Questions for Mr. Conklin, committee, or Mr. Pickard? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have any further industry or anyone? I see no one. So then, welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jody Levin. I'm here on behalf of Charter and Verizon. I will say my clients agree with much of what my colleagues at Lumen had just indicated. We have had good discussions within industry. I do think that we have moved much closer. My clients understand their issue with regard to retail phone service and don't disagree. The amendment that we saw on Monday, however, has implications for wholesale. And that is an issue that I have raised since the June committee meeting as being of a concern to my clients. So we're getting there. Maybe with some additional conversation, we could actually get there. But as it stands now, my clients support the bill as drafted without amendments.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more industry? Missed one, so here's not public testimony. We have anybody from the public? Going once, going twice. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Well, since the Public Service Commission's here, I guess I'm going to throw some questions at them if they'd come up. The nice thing about being in Cheyenne is, people don't need to testify, but they arrive Hi, Mr. Petrie. My question is primarily on the USF, on the price benchmark. And so right now it's currently in statute of $30. When we did the last telecom rewrite, I don't know, 6, 8 years ago. And we gave authority for it to be adjusted. I guess my question is, has it been adjusted or is it still that $30? And is there any concern with us extending the act sunset 2 more years? Do we need to change that $30 number at all, in your opinion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Petrie with the Public Service Commission. I'm the chairman.
Right through the microphone.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Petrie, chairman at the Public Service Commission. The $30 benchmark has not required adjustment. Our review of the data submitted by the telecoms has indicated that it remains close to $30 if you did the calculation the way that it was done in years past before that statutory benchmark was set.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. No reason to believe in the next several years with everything else going on in the marketplace that $30 needs to be changed. Or you do have the authority one time every 4 years. When was the last benchmark review? Do you remember?
Mr. Chairman, we review those numbers every year, and it has not been changed. And I do not believe that there's any particular reason to expect that it would change drastically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Further questions from Mr. Petrie? Senator Scott.
Yeah, question in the area of complaints about service. I and a number of my neighbors are in an area that has been deregulated. Our landline carrier is CenturyLink, but the cell phone service is available while there experiences significant outages, and a lengthy call is likely to be dropped at least once in the course of the call. So we depend on the landline. My question is, if there's a problem with service with the landline, do you have any statutory ability to take a complaint and get the company to look at getting it resolved?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, as Mr. Kunkelman stated, it's been several years now that the commission determined that CenturyLink, now Lumen, met the requirements to be declared competitive and thus fall under much less supervision by the commission. As far as service quality complaints for a company like Lumen that's in that situation, we do get complaints, and we do work with the company to attempt to resolve those complaints to the customer's satisfaction. It is not a situation where the commission has teeth to enforce any solutions. So we request attention be given to solve the problem, and the company responds generally. It's not, it's not always entirely satisfying to the customers, but I believe that that the company does make a good faith effort to address those things. It is difficult. There are areas where the legacy landline equipment is rather old and rather difficult to maintain and to service. And I know that there is often more delay than customers would prefer in getting those problems addressed.
And Mr. Chairman, this is a bit of a problem because they deregulate based on a wide area, and then you have pockets within that area where the landline is the primary carrier, and then there really isn't a very good substitute. So far, I haven't seen a problem in terms of getting service complaints dealt with, but it sure makes me nervous, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for Mr. Petrie? Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Got off easy today. Any further public comment? And do we have anybody online? I don't believe we do, but
Mr. Chairman, we have Brett Moline online.
okay, let's bring them in. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me all right?
You're online. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'll try to be uncharacteristically brief. We support the bill as written with the extending that sunset to 2025. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Moline? Seeing none. Thank you. Do we have any other testimony of any kind? Okay, public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move that we accept LSO draft 23 LSO 128 for the 2023 session as a committee bill from this committee.
Thank you. Moved and seconded, second Blackburn. Amendments or discussion? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, I do see there is an amendment from Lumen, which, I mean, I generally agree with in concept. And so if there is a way for them to continue to work with their colleagues, I know there's 5 or 6 major players and they're always trying to agree with one another, but I understand that sometimes that's not possible. But if they can come to some agreement before session when we deal with this in January, I'd certainly be happy if there were revised language to bring an amendment of that kind as the bill moves forward. But at this time, I don't think I'll introduce it.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to that idea, I would just point out there might be a bill title problem if you're not very careful about it, because a bill to sunset typically wouldn't be opened up and amended because it would be expanding the scope. Appreciate, there might be a way we can write that, or might be a way you can put in an amendment that offers a tweak to keep it open. I'd be interested to hear from staff on that. But typically, if it's a straight sunset, Telecom Act sunset, you wouldn't be able to amend it, other than the sunset date.
Good catch, Senator. Staff comments on it? Josh?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Senator Case is correct that, that you might run into amending a bill beyond its title. The general, it is an act relating to telecommunications as the first part of the title, and so it could be seen as somewhat broad there, but if you wanted to be able to amend it, it might be something worth thinking about, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
I think I know a way to fix this one. Mr. Chairman, I'll pose an amendment. We would add to the title language saying authorizing additional functions for the commission, the Public Service Commission, and then add the following, and the LSO staff would have to figure out how to place it, but it would say the commission shall accept complaints concerning quality of service or lack thereof from telecommunications customers, and shall, one little I, maintain a log of the complaints, and 2, at least annually post a summary of the number of complaints and their areas of concern. So pretty plain vanilla, telling them to do something they're probably going to do anyhow. but giving them clear statutory authority to do that.
Committee, do you understand? That's an amendment, not an
It's an
addition to the title. That's an actual amendment.
Well, that's an amendment, but it would require an addition to the title, and that would solve the problem that Senator Case was pointing out.
Okay, I have a friendly one potential on the title. Would be just to strike sunset date out of it, and that opens it up, but all you have to do is just do Wyoming Telecommunications Act. It doesn't have to be any more.
You just made everyone panic.
I'm sure I did.
Just say amending the,
Amending the sunset.
amending the Wyoming Telecommunications Act.
And that does open it up. We may get further.
That would work too, Mr. Chairman. Which way would you prefer to go?
I'll acquiesce to the committee. I think the way I proposed is simpler. It just lets it go, but I'm happy either direction.
Okay.
So, committee?
You have a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Well, we're on Senator Scott. Senator Case.
well, another,
We're on Senator Scott's motion.
I understand, but we're kind of all in the same concept of this should have an amendment to keep it open for later. One amendment would be to adopt the Lumen amendment and just do that and leave it as a work in practice.
Now we're up to 3. So we better,
Mr. Chairman, it's up to the committee. I'd be content with your amendment. It does get the thing done. I'd be
you're gonna
content.
back, I'll go ahead and bring mine and see if I get a second. If I fail on that. then we'll
Okay,
go to
you've got a
Senator
second.
Case. Have a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, is your amendment just to not have any changes inside the bill, but just to have something in the title to allow for future changes? It's kind of odd. I haven't seen that done before. But we wouldn't change anything in the bill but the sunset date. But the title would be extra broad.
That's what I'm doing. I'm just
Yeah.
broadening the title. And I'm sorry about doing this open discussion with you.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, I have concerns about that as a process. I mean, we could just broaden in the title of every bill and have it be available for ultimate modification. I'm not sure. We actually have a bill that doesn't do anything but the sunset, but we want to, without expanding the bill, allow it to be expanded later. It kind of violates the theory of good committee work, in my opinion.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let me just make sure I understand. With your amendment, they would read an act relating to telecommunications, amending the Wyoming Telecommunications Act,
Correct.
making conforming change and providing an effective date. Mr. Chairman, I think that gets the job done. Extending the sunset date is an amendment to the Telecommunication Act. But this would permit additional amendments, the way you would word the title.
Senator Scott, I agree, and I respond somewhat to Senator Case. Is we do this all the time as we insert good committee work or not. It might panic some people a little because it does allow for some shenanigans potentially could happen, but I think this bill's been worked enough. We're pretty clear as far as committee where we're headed. So I guess I'll leave it at that and go to further discussion. Further comments? Senator Case?
Well, Mr. Chairman, this will be a very different committee, and it just kind of tees it up and kicks it down the road. But that's fine, whatever the committee wants.
Discussion committee. Question called. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Okay, raise the hands. Everybody in favor, raise your hand. Failed. On to the next motion. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I move an amendment on page 2, line 10 and 9 that just says on and after July 1st, 2019, just delete that language and say the commission shall review the price benchmark. So I'm just deleting a current date and statute, which would update the bill, also not cause any nefarious harm to it, but allow it to be broad enough that we're talking about more than the sunset. So just delete the date currently in the statute on lines 9 and 10. And that's a better process.
As a second. Comments? Seeing none, question called. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion's passed. Further amendments.
Question.
Question being called. This will be a roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 128, Wyoming Telecommunications Act sunset date. Senator Boner? Senator Case? Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Representative Blackburn? Representative Burt? Representative Clausen? Representative Duncan?
Aye.
Representative Ayer? Representative LeBeau? Representative McGuire?
Aye.
Representative Roscoe? Chairman Driscoll?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Zwanitzer?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 12 ayes, 2 noes.
Motion is passed. We are on to insurance. We'll start with Bill Draft 23 LSO 116, insurance rebating amendments. We got staff once again. Come on up. Welcome.
Morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Anna Johnson, LSO. This bill draft was requested at the June meeting. It's entitled 23 LSO 116 Insurance Rebating Amendments. There's a few conforming amendments on pages 2 and 3. And then on page 4, a new paragraph 4 is added that basically says it prohibits offering or providing insurance as an inducement to the purchase of another policy or using free or no cost in an advertisement. And then paragraph 5 on page 4 prohibits unfairly discriminating against a customer when offering or declining to offer any of the items authorized under subsection C of this section. Subsection B, starting on page 4, indicates that nothing in this statute or of subsection A of the statute shall prohibit any of the various practices that follow. And if you'd like, I can go through them, but there's quite a few. Yes?
You're okay, I think.
No? Okay. And then in subsection C, starting on page 9, this indicates that an insurer or producer may do any of the following unless prohibited by subsection A. They may offer or give non-cash gifts, items, or services to customers in connection with the marketing, sale, purchase, or retention of insurance contracts, and that can't exceed $100. And then when we're talking about commercial or institutional customers, they can offer or give non-cash gifts, items, or services to them in connection with the marketing, sale, purchase, or retention of contracts of insurance, but you can't exceed 5% of the written premium or 5% of the quoted premium. Insurers can also conduct raffles or drawings for prizes to the extent permitted by law, as long as there's no cost to the entrance. Subsection D on page 11 states that anyone providing gifts or any other items in C must retain records of the transactions. And then in subsection E, the insurance commissioner may adopt rules and regulations when implementing these new permitted practices. Section 2 on page 12 repeals outdated statutes, and then section 3 gives the effective date. And that's essentially the bill.
Good, thank you. Questions for Ms. Johnson? Mr. Scott, do you have something? Okay.
Insurance Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We have industry people, I'm sure we do somewhere.
Departments are funny.
I'll bring the department up.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Commissioner Jeffrey with the Department of Insurance. With me is Ms. Howard, our deputy, and our licensing supervisor, Brian Stevens. If you would like, we can go in more detail with the bill, or if you want us just to go directly to questions, we'd be happy to do either.
I think we're comfortable just to go to questions. Allowed this field for Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize, at the June meeting, I was attending via Zoom and my internet failed when we were dealing with this bill. So I may ask some questions that were dealt with at that point, but a series of them, Mr. Chairman, on page 5, lines 12 and 13, there is the provision is for readjustment of premium rate. And the language I'm questioning is which may be made retroactive only for that policy year. And my question is, why do we allow any retroactive premium? It seems to me that that's potentially grossly unfair to the customer. They pay for insurance, and then after they have a claim, suddenly they have a retroactive rate that is much higher. Why should we not just remove that phrase or say shall not be retroactive?
Mr. Chairman, Tana Howard, Deputy Insurance Commissioner. Senator Scott, to answer your question, this is existing language that we currently have. So we're kind of rearranging everything. And the reason that we would allow this is there's different types of insurance policies. A commercial policy, with possibly construction or whatnot, they may have, with several employees, they may have an audit every year that's due, and their insurance premium is adjusted based off of different amounts or totals or for each year. So they may get a reduction in their premium based off of their total sales for the year, or their employees or their man hours. And that is what this is allowed. It wouldn't be typical for every insurance policy, but there are certain insurance policies that would adjust this. And this just allows the insurer to essentially, and most of these references in this section, it allows the insurer to underwrite and adjust their premiums and rates based on their risk.
There's Scott.
Mr. Chairman, have we ever seen them retroactively raise rates for customers that have claims?
Retroactively for claims, sorry, Mr. Chairman, retroactively for claims, not so much entirely. It's not based necessarily on the claims themselves, but on the policy risk and what's on that policy. So things change on an insurance policy throughout the year, and that's what this is basing that rate off of. Not claims. We wouldn't allow an insurer to, for that policy year, if you filed a claim, to then backdate a rate increase. These would be you had a certain amount of sales, and you estimate your sales on your insurance policy prior to that year, and they base your premium based on that estimate. Then occasionally you would have to possibly submit those receipts quarterly or semi-annually or just annually, and they would adjust the premium based off of that. Sometimes it's a reduction, sometimes it's an increase. Not a common insurance policy. These would be a specific to certain types of risks. So not something that you would see on your personal lines policy, if you had a hail claim per se.
Yeah, I guess I've got a little, what you just said, I understand, but when you actually read what Senator Scott picked up, what it really says is based on loss or expense experienced by the insurer. And it gives me great concern. I understand the rebase on difference in income or employees, but when it the actual statement is loss or expense experienced by the insurer, that is a little different than a rebase. It seems to me that it allows them to retroactively go back in, and I think their standard practice normally is to drop people, is it not, the following year, but this actually, I think it was a good catch by Senator Scott. I've got some concerns with even having that language in a bill, even if it is existing. I guess give me your thoughts of why it should be there, because what would the results be if that part wasn't there?
Mr. Chairman, Brian Stevens, Licensing Supervisor at the Department of Insurance. Again, the result of this would be higher premiums at the beginning of the year based on what could be expected. And I would like to point out on line 11, this is only for group insurance policies. So it doesn't have anything to do with an individual commercial policy. It doesn't have anything to do with an individual personal auto policy. This is only applicable to group insurance policies where your risk changed based on how many employees you have, what kind of health risks have come up during the last year, anything along those lines. And it is done because certain groups underwrite at different times of the year. So the insurance policy may be effective, say, January 1st, but that audit isn't due until July 1st, so adjustments may need to be made.
And again, Mr. Chairman, this is something that we've had on the books since the late 70s, early 80s. And it's not something we have received a complaint about. It's a typical insurance standard practice. So if we had an issue with it, we would have definitely amended it as we were working with LSO and drafting this. But it's been on the books a while.
Questions? Senator Scott.
I hear their explanation of what the current practice is, but it strikes me that the way they're describing it operating is not the way the statute would allow it to operate. Mr. Chairman, at what point do you want amendments in this thing?
We'll do the amendments when we work the bill. We can conceptually talk about one now, though. Everybody's going to think about it if you want to.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm thinking is saying instead of which may be made retroactive, which shall not be retroactive. And that would put a stop to it, but I don't really want to interfere with the normal practices, which seem to be benign, but particularly you talk about a small group health insurance policy. You get an individual, say, that has a heart attack and is going to be quite expensive. They might come back and raise that health insurance premium like you wouldn't believe.
Comments?
Mr. Chairman, I understand Senator Scott's concern, and if the committee would like an amendment on that, that'd be fine. But we have not. I understand Senator Scott what it's saying is maybe not the exact intent. For Senator Scott's example of raising a health premium, that would not be. There's several other sections within the code where that wouldn't be necessarily allowed. But yes, I understand where there could be confusion. That's not exactly how we would interpret it.
Thank you. Further comments? Mr. Co-Chairman.
And I'm sure this is covered. Just some general questions. Where am I at? I'm on page 4, basically. We're talking about, rebates and how we advertise free and no cost, and you can't, give these inducements. When we have policies that have multiple perks, or you have a reduction if you buy, on individual policies, I assume they're the same for group, right? You might get a cheaper life insurance policy if you go with this company for your health policies, and my car insurance does all sorts of stuff, right? If you do home, auto, healthcare, are they still allowed to do that under this new wording? As I'm reading through the new statutory language, I just want to make sure that's still allowed to have those kind of benefits. Is it really on how we advertise those? Because you can start, I guess, offering what I would call inducements in my mind. By buying this, you'll get a better rate on X, Y, and Z. Is that covered somewhere else in the code, or I shouldn't be worried about this language interfering with that, and I just want to be reassured?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, the language that we're speaking of here, it specifically says offer or provide insurance as an inducement. So the example we'd be looking at here is like if our state insurance policy said, well, if you get your insurance with the state, you will get a free accident policy. That's deceptive marketing, that's deceptive advertising. There's nothing free in insurance, and we just want to make sure that it is clearly outlined that you can't say that a policy will be free.
Other questions? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, question on page 4, line 23. It says from non-participating insurance. What do you mean by non-participating?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, non-participating insurance would be a surplus lines insurer, someone that is not admitted in Wyoming but underwrites unusual risks.
Thank you. Further questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott, we've got time.
page 6, lines 17, 18, and 19. This is the situation where they're selling linked mutual funds and life insurance. And the language is the life insurance may be purchased independently at the same price and the same terms and conditions if purchased contemporaneously. Why do we need that clause there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, we could adjust that. Again, this is existing language from 2613-111 subsection B. And this is just addressing, similar to Co-Chairman Swanitzer, that these types of products could be sold at the same time. What this section is identifying is securities or annuities or mutual funds or different investments can be sold sometimes in conjunction with insurance policies. And this is just allowing that and outlining that these products are not necessarily insurance products per se, and that it would be allowed within this. It is pretty lengthy, yes, but this is existing language that we kept in there.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, further question, same page, page 6, line 7. Unabsorbed premium deposits. What is an unabsorbed premium deposit?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott. So this section talks about, keep in mind, the code, addresses all different types of insurance companies and different structures. So this would be, as it says, right before, it's similar to dividends or premiums that basically aren't used unabsorbed for the purposes of the risk and the policy. So they would be in some situation structured, giving back to the policyholders. Giving reference to, some insurance companies give a safe driver check or whatnot. Other companies structure it differently, but that is what this section is addressing.
Other questions, committee? All done, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I got a couple of other points mentioned, but I have a specific amendments on. We'll deal with that.
Okay. Thank you. Have Bruce Spencer online as well.
We do, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Mr. Spencer.
Good morning, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, Bruce Spencer. I am a lobbyist and attorney based in Montana. I represent the Mountain Health Co-op, which is a small health insurance company that writes insurance in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you this morning. I just wanted to tell the committee how important it is that Wyoming adopt some changes to its rebating statute. Currently, Wyoming's statutory structure doesn't allow for anything that we call rebating. And rebating is any sort of a benefit given to a consumer that isn't written into the policy. So for example, if Mountain Health Co-op wanted to incentivize consumers to get a health checkup and they wanted to pay them $50 to do that, under current Wyoming law, we can't do that because that's not in the policy. So that's considered a rebate. And this bill allows for individual policies an expenditure of up to $100 per year for that sort of thing. And that is a benefit to the consumer because then companies can do innovative things that in the case of Mountain Health Co-op helps the health of the consumer. So that particular part of this statute on page 9 is really necessary in Wyoming. The other two states that my company writes in both allow a certain dollar amount to be given as rebating to consumers every year. And this would certainly be consistent with that. On page 10 at the very top, where it talks about consumer policies and the 5% of the premium, I guess it's starting on line 13. Those are for large group, in context of health insurance, large group policies. My one concern is that a small company like Mountain Health Co-op could get outbid in the gifting process if you had a 5% premium cap. I mean, I'll be honest, my company that I represent certainly couldn't afford that. And there may be others in Wyoming that can't as well. And the big national folks might have a benefit there. But it's my understanding that some of the language in this bill came from an NAIC model. So I'm sure that was chewed on there at NAIC. I wasn't a part of those meetings, but generally they look at those sorts of things. But that was just my one concern with the 5%. If I may, I wanted to address Senator Scott's concern on page 5 about the retroactive charge on a group policy. That ability is important. And if you're going to make changes, may I respectfully suggest that you bring in stakeholders who write in the large group policy area and discuss it with them before you make any legislative amendments and legislative changes to that existing language. It's been there since the 80s, and there hasn't been problems as the department indicated. I would strongly urge chatting with those people that write group policies and getting some information on how that section works. Perhaps it can address your concerns before you actually do amendments that might get into law. So that would be that. Happy to answer any questions. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Questions for Mr. Spencer? Mr. Spencer, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any more industry? There's none to comment. There we come. Welcome. Move faster, I'll shut you out. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name is Daniel York. I'm a licensed insurance agent here in Wyoming and have been for over 10 years now. I am representing AWIA, which is the Association of Wyoming Insurance Agents. And we are very happy that you guys are looking at this. I think it's well time to update some of these laws. And we only have one comment. We similar to the prior comment there with a 5% of written premium for current customers with these larger commercial and type of policies. We would suggest putting a cap on that of $1,000. And as was indicated, those can be sometimes outbid by these large, may or may not be Wyoming-owned agencies that are coming in and maybe interested in buying up business, quote unquote. So that's the only comment I would have. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. York? Senator Boner?
So just so I understand, you say strike the 5%, just put $1,000 cap, not a higher of the two or whatever.
Yeah, and I should have said that clearly. 5% or 1,000, whichever would be less of the two. Yeah, thank you.
Questions? Thank you. We're through the industry. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Public testimony is closed. We have no one else online, correct? Bad about that. Public pleasure on the bill.
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved, seconded. Senator Scott. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, first one's easy. Page 9, line 9. Amendment is to delete must and insert shall. I don't know what's a bill drafting standard or merely a custom, but shall is the word we use for such things, not must.
Second.
Moved and seconded. No debate. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Amendment's passed. Next amendment, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let me explain what I want to do with the next amendment. It starts on line 17, page 9. Right now, as the bill is before us, it makes a distinction of what you can do in this area between commercial accounts and individual accounts. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest that's having talked to people in the business, this is a trap for the unwary, because you have, in a state with as many small businesses as we are, the possibility that your individual customer is also a small business customer. And it's unclear, say, if you invite him to dinner or you give him a ticket to a ball game and accompany him and do your sales pitch there. Are you talking his individual business or his commercial business? The rules are different. You can get caught unnecessarily. So what I want to do is consolidate them. So, Mr. Chairman, what I would do would be to delete on page 9, line 17 through 23. On page 10, line 3, delete commercial or institutional, so it'd be read to customers. So it's going to cover both. On page 10, lines 10 and 11, delete commercial or an institutional, so it would just say per customer. And then after exceed on page 10, line 11, insert the greater of $100 or and then incorporating the suggestion we just heard on lines 13 and 16, after 5%, insert not to exceed $1,000. So the 5% is fine until you get to $1,000. And then you have an overall cap of $1,000. You have an overall minimum you can give of 100, and you are treating the individual and the institutional customers the same.
Comments, committee?
Seconded.
Seconded.
Let me make sure I like it.
Mr. Chairman, could we get a reaction from the Department of Insurance on that? I don't mean to put them on the spot, but
Mr. Chairman, in response to this, first of all, this was model language to separate the commercial and individual policies. If we'll look at page 11, starting on line 5, it does state that any person that provides a gift item or service or prize under the subsection shall retain records. So in that record retention, Senator Driscoll, if I were your insurance agent and you had your personal auto policy with me and your commercial farm policy with me, if I were to give you some sort of gift, I would have to keep records on which policy that would be applied to. These records are meant to be kept so if there is an agent exam, if we do have any kind of complaint, so if I have your personal auto and Senator Scott's personal auto and Senator Scott feels like he is being treated unfairly, we would be able to show exactly where that line is being drawn. When we bring in commercial and personal lines on the same page, the reason these are different and we have the $100 cap is because there may be just a single line of insurance, like a personal auto policy, that might not cost any more than $500 a year. So that 5% cap is very, very minimal. That's why we put the $100 in there, to make sure that every individual customer is being treated fairly. On the commercial side, we left that at 5%. That is the number given by the model language, and we just stuck with it. We knew that would probably be the biggest point of contention in this. We left that in there because in some instances, when we have a larger commercial account, there may be a board of directors that you want to take out to dinner and give your sales pitch instead of an individual person. So rather than, Zwanitzer janitorial company, who is just co-chairman Zwanitzer, or it would be, capital cleaning that is the entire corporation's committee. Either way, you would be able to take out all of the stakeholders that would have an interest in the insurance policy and give them your pitch while being able to, without breaking the law, afford to do that. We left the 5% cap in there because typically on a commercial account like this, commissions are anywhere from 10 to 12%. And we very much doubt that anybody would give up half of the money they would make on the policy in order to land it. We wanted to leave the headroom in there. We do not disagree with having a cap on there. The industry that has testified on this are out in the field, and they know more what the impacts would be than we were, and we welcome their comments on this.
Questions, committee? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, this is a NAIC Model Act. It's not like the Model Acts that are required for the accreditation of the department, because those relate to how you review insurance companies. This is more just a commercial regulation. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest that the NAIC process, every state is larger than Wyoming. You have a bias toward things that work in large states with large accounts. And I think this is a little home cooking that's appropriate in this, but I'd like to hear the department's comments.
Mr. Chairman, Dana Howard, Deputy Insurance Commissioner. Senator Scott, yes, you are correct. This is not an NAIC model law for accreditation purposes. And I don't disagree, as Mr. Stevens testified, the 5% was a starting point. It was in the model. That's what we went with. The department completely supports and agrees with AWIA's comment about the 5% or $1,000. In terms of your amendment, I just want to clarify to make sure the department understands. You are supporting the AWIA amendment or suggestion of the 5% not to exceed $1,000. And then you're removing the commercial piece and adding them together as one. And you've referenced $100. Are you stating that, and I apologize I just want to make sure that we understand it, that the entire commercial, I mean, any type of producer, commercial or personal lines or whatnot, would be subject to the 5% not to exceed 1,000?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Scott.
the way it's structured with the amendment, you can always go to $100, same as you had on the individual, just applying that to everybody. Between $100 and $1,000, you're limited but to 5%, and then you can't go over the $1,000 cap. That would be the effect if the amendment passed. So you can always pass out something small that is, or not so small, but still less than $100. Between that, you've got the 5%, and then that is capped at 1,000.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Scott, for that clarification. Yes, I don't believe the department would have any issues with that. The whole purpose of this update is just to allow the producers to be able to offer their clients somebody and to be something and to be more business friendly, because we don't believe it is right now. So we would support that amendment and wouldn't have any problems. Thank you.
Further questions while we have them here? Senator Scott, any more?
Mr. Chairman, that's the amendment. I think it does simplify the world for the insurance agents. One standard, and they don't have to worry, do you have a commercial policy? Or are you strictly individual policies? I think as written, it's a bit of a trap for the unwary.
Staff, do you have the amendment? Good enough?
I believe so, yes, Mr.
Perfect.
Chairman.
Okay. Question being called. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Amendments passed. So, any further amendments? Question on the bill, roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 116, insurance rebating amendments as amended. Senator Boner? Senator Case? Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Scott? Representative Blackburn? Representative Burt? Representative Clausen?
Aye.
Representative Duncan? Representative Ayer? Representative LeBeau? Representative McGuire?
Aye.
Representative Roscoe? Chairman Driscoll?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Zwanitzer?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 14 ayes.
Bill is passed. We're on to Bill 23 LSO 292, medical malpractice statutory update. What? I was gonna break after this. You want to break now?
No.
Okay. No, I was definitely gonna break after this. Welcome again.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill draft was requested as a statutory update by the Department of Insurance. It's entitled 23 LSO 292, Medical Malpractice Statutory Update. This bill draft gives the insurance commissioner the discretion to require malpractice insurance insurers to require them to report all claims against healthcare providers and a report of all awards and settlements given in cases against healthcare providers. If the commissioner requires a report, he has to give insurers not less than 6 months' notice that a report is required. This is obviously a very short bill, and That is what the bill does, and I would stand for any questions.
Question from Ms. Johnson? Got a minute, Senator Scott, we're fine. Did you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just having trouble. I know I have the bill.
We'll give you a minute, take a look. Yeah, we just will get the department up, thank you.
Would you like me to step down?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead, or you move down one, either way. Senator Scott may have questions. You can go ahead while Senator Scott's.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Commissioner Rude. This is requirement in the statute was a result of, in 2005, 6, and 7, there was a real problem with medical providers finding malpractice insurance. At that time, there were 2 providers that made up 90% of the market. And so the law was passed, so we would look into this each year, get all their data, and attach it to our annual report. I'm asking for the discretion to require that of the insurers because we're able to get that information through a national producer database. It's a federal database. It's much easier for us to get the information and write the report, and it would alleviate the burden on the insurers to do it. And so it just made complete sense for us. If something should happen down the road and the database, the national database should go away, we would give 6 months notice and say, we're still going to get the information from you. So that's really all this does.
Question for Commissioner Rude. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me this makes a lot of sense. We have quite a history in this area. The primary carrier that we had was St. Paul. They, I think, exited the medical malpractice insurance business entirely due to the losses. Not just Wyoming, just everywhere. And then we had New Mexico Physicians Mutual, and their regulators in New Mexico told them they had to get out of Wyoming, that they couldn't afford it. And then we had, what was the one from Ohio?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I don't recall.
They were going broke too, and they had to get out of Wyoming. Things have stabilized since, but you have the potential for another crisis. Mr. Chairman, the question I would have on this is not that we ought to do it and alleviate the burden, especially if we can get the information otherwise. But if we have another crisis, the question I would have for the insurance commissioner is why not 3 months instead of 6 months? 3 months is adequate time, I would think, for an insurance company. These are big claims, and I know all about them.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that would be fine with me. I just wanted to alleviate the burden generally. I don't think the national database is ever going to go away. On the federal level, once there's a program, it usually stays. Here, we would like to alleviate some of those programs on the state level. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
I don't think it's going to go away, but I think it's perfectly competent. The feds would be incompetent in managing it. So, Mr. Chairman, I do think 6 months is a little too long if we have a crisis and need information in a hurry.
We'll be ready for the amendment. You don't have to comment on the feds. Questions for Commissioner Reed? Thank you. Welcome. No one online. We have one here, though. Welcome, Ms. Wilkins.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Catherine Wilkinson here today on behalf of American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. Speaking in support of the bill, we do think that it's great to relieve some mandatory reporting, and we did think that there was sufficient lead time in there should it need to be required. I would have to run it back by my clients in terms of the time frame, as the 6 months specifically was appreciated and noted in the comments to provide today, but I'm happy to do so. But we do stand in support of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Ms. Wilkinson? Seeing none, thank you. Further testimony? Going once, Going twice. Public testimony. Closed. Mr. Representative Blackburn, did you have a? Okay, moved and seconded. Amendments or Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, page 2, line 16, move we delete 6 and insert 3. I think that will achieve the purposes of the bill entirely, but I think it will enable us to get information a little more timely if something goes wrong.
Second, moved and seconded. Debate? Mr. Co-Chairman.
I guess I'd maybe like to ask, do you contact, I mean, if we go to, I would imagine on a 6-month, that's you check in with them, you're renewing their policies every half year. In a 3-month notice, I guess I just want to make sure the department feels that they would all be able to be notified in time and switch over. And I guess I'd just like to hear from the department saying that there's no concerns with them being able to find everybody in those 90 days and make sure they're all aware and have agreement from the industry that that's not burdensome whatsoever for them to have to convert and go back and report.
Commissioner Rood.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Rood, Representative Swanser, we'll actually know this before the 3 months or even the 6 months. I mean, they will have to, they set their rates and they send us their rates. And so we see them. So we'll know sufficiently ahead of time if there's a problem, if the rates just skyrocket or if we have some problems with companies pulling out. So for us, whether it's 3 or 6, it's fine for us. I think that's plenty of time either way. We'll know well in advance of asking them for the data if there's a problem.
Question, Commissioner Rood. Thank you. We're back on the amendment. Amendments 3 months, been moved and seconded. Any more debate? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Amendments passed. We're back on the bill. Any further amendments? Question called. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 292, medical malpractice statutory update. Senator Boner? Senator Case?
Aye.
Senator Nethercutt?
Aye.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Representative Blackburn? Representative Burt?
Aye.
Representative Clausen?
Aye.
Representative Duncan?
Aye.
Representative Ayer?
Aye.
Representative LeBeau? Representative McGuire?
Aye.
Representative Roscoe?
Aye.
Chairman Driscoll?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Zwanitzer?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 14 ayes.
Bill is passed. It is 9:50. We'll take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 10:05. All right, we're live again. We are N13. We're only 15 minutes late. We're doing good. State Treasurer's Office unclaimed property statute updates. Bill draft 23 LSO 0275 reviews, revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. We want to do,
I can give you a quick.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I see we've got treasurer staff here as well. So go ahead.
Oh, I was going to quickly say, Mr. Chairman, we had not talked about this act in our previous two meetings, but it was on our interim management council directives. And so as we were looking at the agenda about a month ago, saying, did we knock out everything that was asked of us? We kind of said, hey, we never heard from the treasurer's office, and what was this about? And LSO was nice enough to reach out and talk to the treasurer's office. And Anna, I believe, prepared this very long bill draft in front of you in the past 3 weeks on very short notice. And so appreciation to her as well. But that's where it came from, if people are wondering why we had not talked about the Unclaimed Property Act. But it is my understanding it's mostly a model act with 3 or 4 portions specific to Wyoming. But I'm sure we could have Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, we just will have Ms. Johnson come up again. We're gonna put a name plaque up for you. Thank you for the work, and you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you'd like, I can give you a high-level overview of this bill draft. This bill draft was requested by the Treasurer's Office and is the subject of one of the committee's interim topics, as already explained. It's entitled 23 LSO 275, Revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. This bill draft replaces the existing Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. It's much more expansive than what is currently in Wyoming statute and covers properties such as cryptocurrency and game-related digital content as it relates to gameplay currency, among other things. The bill draft outlines when certain property is presumed abandoned, and that starts on page 19. It also assigns time periods to certain types of properties to determine when they are presumed abandoned. The draft also provides rules for taking custody of property presumed abandoned, how to give notice to an apparent owner that their property is deemed abandoned, how the administrator, who is the state treasurer, goes about taking custody of abandoned property, the rules regarding the sale of abandoned property by the administrator, the requirement that holders of abandoned property have to file a report regarding such to the administrator, and penalties if a report is not filed. There is a staff comment on page 77 regarding when a holder may pay or deliver property to the administrator before the property is presumed abandoned. The committee may wish to consider adopting more thorough standards there regarding delivery of property, or for when the administrator should consent to accepting payment or delivery of the property. The way the subsection is written now, it's possible that an unconstitutional taking under the Fifth Amendment could result. And I do recognize that some of this language on page 76, 77 is partially in current statute, but in current statute, the property isn't deemed abandoned until the time period that's assigned to it has elapsed. And then there's also a staff comment on page 80 regarding a potential unconstitutional taking issue. To avoid this potential issue, the committee may wish to consider omitting the word before in line 15 on page 79. The subsection in question on page 79 is also in the current unclaimed property statute. There are a few conforming amendments in section 2 starting on page 129, and then section 3 on page 138 repeals the old Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. And then section 4 is the effective date, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions, committee, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, how long has this bill draft been available?
I believe it was posted to the website on Monday.
Comments?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I might as well say it right now. Mr. Chairman, I got this bill yesterday, about 3 hours before I left to come down here, and I will freely admit that I didn't look at the bill. I went and changed my irrigating dams instead, and I have not read the bill. If it's been available to the public only since Monday, I have great reservations about proceeding with the bill, Mr. Chairman. This subject, it makes me nervous, and a model act in this area makes me nervous because I think, I've seen some or heard some people in other states look at unclaimed property as a way to raise revenue for the state. And I think you've got potential constitutional issues. I think you've got potential traps for the unwary. And I think it would be safer if we had more time to vet it and not give it the blessing of an interim committee bill when there really hasn't been time for people to read it and say, oh, this little section just doesn't quite work and is likely to take people's property away for the benefit of the state. And I have some questions for some of the small amounts. I know I've had an amount of, I forget, it was $5 or $3 over some check that went astray that's there. It's just not worth the hassle and the trouble. And we need to have a simple system for dealing with some of the real small things like that, Mr. Chairman. So I have reservations with proceeding will be a no vote on the bill, just simply because of the time.
Further questions, Ms. Johnson? Representative Black.
I don't have a question, but I think we need to proceed with this and listen to all the testimony.
Oh, we
whether
will.
Table it or whatever.
We'll listen to all the
Okay,
testimony.
thank
That'll come to the motion on the bill. Senator Scott's at. So further questions for Ms. Johnson? Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Treasurer's Office. Welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Bill Pilger, General Counsel, State Treasurer's Office. With me this morning is Jeff Robertson, Administrator of our Unclaimed Property Division. Certainly, we appreciate the concerns that have been raised this morning. This draft has been about a year of work in process, and certainly we believe is a strong product. As indicated, it is originally based on the Uniform Model Act, so the Model Revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act, and the version drafted in 2016. Our current statute, the current Unclaimed Property Act, was passed in 1993, but was based on the 1981 Act. And so even when it was adopted, it was already 10 years behind at this point. Our current law is based on 40-year-old law. There have been minimal amendments at this point, again, over the 30 years that it's been in place. But it does, very briefly, kind of hitting some high points, it modernizes the act. It allows holders to provide notice and other communications via electronic mail. It does add new forms of property, virtual currency, as Ms. Johnson recognized, gaming or gambling accounts. Game-related digital content is addressed and excludes that. But it even addresses tax-deferred and tax-exempt retirement accounts. Roth IRAs, they weren't actually in existence when our original act was passed. They didn't come out until 1997. As well as other tax-deferred accounts such as health savings accounts. Those weren't created until 2003. Among other things, it also does allow for automatic payments to owners based on data matching. So there's a abbreviated process instead of having to go through the full claims process. It is limited to a lower dollar value amount, because we do recognize that it can be quite onerous to go through the full claims process when we're talking small dollar amounts. It also makes it easier for heirs to claim small dollar amounts. And it otherwise adjusts dormancy periods so that Wyoming is more consistent with other states, which should make it easier for holders as far as understanding and being aware of what our dormancy periods are. And then our current act does not have any confidentiality or security of information provisions. And so this does add those. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take questions. We can go through the act. It is, as everybody recognizes, quite long, but we are prepared to do that.
Questions? Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why has it taken 40 years for the Treasurer's Office to come forward to update this very important piece of legislation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I don't have a great answer for you. Certainly, it's long overdue. That's why we feel that it's appropriate to present a revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. I don't know if the administrator has anything more to add.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott. This RUPA, as it's called in the circle, was enacted in 2016, and since then there's been a slow trickle of states that have taken that on. So I think there's roughly about a third of the states currently have a version of this or a modified version of this at this point. So the only thing I could say, I know we were waiting a few years to see how other states reacted to it and make sure it was something that would be appropriate, and also gave us some time to communicate with some of the other states as far as things that we may want to look at from the act.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So is it fair to say that 2/3 of the states don't have this legislation?
Yes, Chairman and Senator Nethercott, I would agree with that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, as of April, our understanding is there are, I believe, 16 states that have adopted RUPA, as we call it, or at least some version of it. But yes, otherwise, the remaining states either still have the original 1981 version or have adopted a 1996 version.
Other questions? Seeing none. What's that? Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, we just, well, go ahead and work through it.
Mr. Chairman.
What?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
if while they're working through it, if we could in particular address the staff comments, I'd really appreciate that aspect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the comment.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, page 2 starts with Article 1 and it addresses general provisions. Since there is a lot here, I will just try and hit the high points. I will point out on page 3, line 16, Deaf Master File. This definition was in a different place in RUPA. We moved it into the definitions. We felt it was appropriate to include with other definitions. As I indicated, page 4 does address and define electronic mail and email. Page 6, lines 12 through 13. We added gaming account. Wyoming is one of a handful of states that does now allow gambling, and so we have in some form, and so we believed it was appropriate to add that language. So those accounts, when they become dormant, would come to unclaimed property. And so everyone is aware, if I'm not hitting things, generally speaking, that's all original RUPA language. So I'm hitting those points where we have modified the Model Act. Page 14, lines 6 through 7, we have defined gift cards, or we have We have established a $100 threshold on gift cards, so we would not be accepting gift cards under $100. We can talk about this a little bit later, but we've carved out that exception. Otherwise, there are a lot of small value gift cards.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask questions as we go along, or how would you like to do that?
Senator Case, you may, and you just give a quick note and then take the floor. We'll try to get this quickly as we can. It's a long bill. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I think about when we exclude, we have minimum amounts that can be participating. I think about the original purpose of the Unclaimed Property Act. It wasn't so much to return stuff to people as it was to help financial institutions clear out accounts and things that had, you know, de minimis amounts in some cases, large amounts in other cases, but get them out of their bailiwick, get them to the state, and then the state holds them for a period of time, I guess forever is the original thinking on it. But if an heir or someone shows up, then they get the principal back. They get none of the interest that has been accumulating for years. But so financial institutions were happy to get rid of the account with $4 in it, or you know, that was why they wanted to do it. So wouldn't the same thing apply to the gift card thinking? Really the troublesome ones are the little ones for people that issue the gift cards. They have a liability on their books. I don't know. I'm just asking. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, the $100 exclusion is actually, it's only limited to those gift cards that don't have an expiration date and also don't assess any fees as long as that card is active. So really it would be a situation where presumably it's a gift card that has been left in a drawer somewhere. It doesn't expire, never expires. And so those funds, you know, the owner can eventually, hopefully finds that amount on that gift card and they actually use it at some point. So it doesn't expire and it maintains on that card.
Mr. Chairman, just a slight follow-up. The follow-up would be, how does the issuer of the gift card, the retail establishment or whatever it is, how do they treat that on their books? And so is it still a liability forever? Because I'm not seeing the advantage to them unless they can get it off their books.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, my understanding would be that it would, you know, I'm not going to venture a guess. I don't know. Let's go with that.
Continue on.
Mr. Chairman, moving on, page 19, after getting through the definitions, 103 indicates that the act is inapplicable to foreign transactions. Section 104 grants us rulemaking authority to adopt rules to implement the act. Article 2 starts on page 19 and addresses a presumption of abandonment. Now, Section 201 is essentially a list of all the different types of properties along with their dormancy periods. And so when we talk about dormancy, we're talking about the period of time that the property needs to remain with the holder, so typically a business, before they're required to turn that property over to the state's unclaimed property division. And so depending on the nature of the property, there are different dormancy periods. Page 20, lines 12 through 23, the original RUPA had these combined along with on page 21, lines 1 through 11. So A through D, they were combined and they all had 1 3-year period. We separated these out after talking with some other states. A and B on page 20, lines 14 through 20, they do have the straight 3-year period, but then lines 22 and 23, when we're looking at time deposits, then there is an alternative 3 years or the date of last indication of interest. And then D on page 21 addresses automatically renewable time deposits. And so there's actually 3 different options. So we felt it was appropriate to separate those 4 different types of financial organization deposits. Page 22, lines 20 and 21, and then going on to page 23, addresses proof of death. And so we clarified some language in here and separated these out. On page 25, specific to utility deposits or refunds, we actually replaced, so this would be lines 5 through 18, A and B, we replaced that with our existing Unclaimed Property Act language. In 2021, that language was amended and allowed to exclude, or allows exclusion of deposits or advance payments that were made to cooperative utilities. And so we maintain the intent of that recent amendment to our existing act. At the bottom of page 25, virtual currency is included here. Again, with the intent to modernize our act. Page 26, as mentioned, it includes gaming accounts. And so those accounts would be dormant after 3 years. Page 27, section 202, our current Unclaimed Property Act lumps all retirement accounts into one general provision. Under this proposed RUPA, it separates out different types of retirement accounts. So 202 addresses tax deferred and tax exempt retirement accounts. And page 31, section 203 addresses other tax deferred accounts, specifically including health savings accounts. Again, these weren't in existence at the time of our original act. 204 also addresses custodial accounts for minors when they're presumed abandoned. And so it does, again, clarify these different types of accounts, things that are omitted in our existing act.
We have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when the treasurer gets unclaimed property on tax deferred retirement accounts, one would assume that it was someone deceased and no one claimed it. Does then the unclaimed property department at the treasurer's office do the minimum payments to the IRS, or how is that handled? Or is it, I'm just.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, there are required minimum deductions. I believe it's a 10% deduction that we are required to make. And then that is, the holder does that as they turn that property over to us. And then when that property is claimed, we notify the owner that 10% has been withheld.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, page 35, section 205 addresses contents of safety deposit boxes. Section 206 addresses stored value cards. Stored value cards generally are these prepaid, like Visa debit cards. So they're different than gift cards. Gift cards can be a subcomponent of that, but generally speaking, stored value cards are these prepaid debit cards. Page 36, section 207. So this is when gift cards are presumed abandoned. A gift card with a balance of $100 or greater is presumed abandoned if it's unclaimed by the apparent owner 5 years. A gift card which has no expiration date and does not impose a fee of any kind in relation to the sale is exempt. So that's the exemption I was speaking of earlier. Section 208 on 36, page 36 addresses securities. Section 209 on page 38 addresses related property and when it is presumed abandoned. Section 210 on page 39 addresses indications of apparent owner interest in the property. Page 42, lines 4 through 5. There's language here, if an apparent owner has other property with a financial organization, so one account, if they've been active on one account, that will essentially translate to other accounts if there hasn't been any action on the other accounts, so that it's deemed that there is action on each of those accounts. Page 43, section 211 addresses knowledge of the death of the insured or annuitant. This is where the original definition of death master file is located. And again, we move that to the definition section. Page 47, section 212 addresses deposit accounts for proceeds of insurance policies or annuities. And that closes out Article 2. Article 3 establishes rules for taking custody of property that's presumed abandoned. Section 301 on page 48 addresses the address of the apparent owner, or the last known address is typically the factor that's considered as to where the property, which state is the appropriate program to send that unclaimed property. Section 302 addresses, on page 49, addresses the address of an apparent owner in the state. On page 50, section 303 addresses records that show multiple addresses of an apparent owner. Section 304 on page 51 addresses holders that are domiciled in the state and would allow property to be turned over to Wyoming's program if the holder is domiciled here. Similarly, section 305 and page 52 allows property to come to our program if the business transaction took place in the state. Page 53, section 306 addresses traveler's checks, money orders, or other similar instruments that are presumed abandonment, and simply says that it is to the extent permissible by federal law. So we would simply have to comply with federal law. Section 307 on page 54 addresses the burden of proof to establish that we do in fact have a right to tell a holder that they should turn this property over to us. And so that there are 3 items there that we as the administrator of the program have to satisfy that burden of proof. Page 54, Article 4.
Mr. Chairman, before we go to Article 4, can I ask kind of a dumb question about what in general, when we say with all these different types of properties, it yields a way for the state to have custody of the property. Use the word custody. There was another couple of words in there. But do we still have the standard that if someone comes forward, they get the property back and you're just holding it? It's not really a takings, you're just holding it on their behalf. That's still the overwhelming standard?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, that's exactly correct. Section 3430-604 on page 71, it states that the administrator as agent for the state assumes custody and responsibility for the safekeeping of the property. And then there's language later that very clearly indicates that the owner is the owner of the property.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on the arguments about takings. And maybe we can weave this in later, but does the takings argument apply? I mean, if the state's just holding your asset and then it returns it to you, I can't see how it's a takings. But I can see that if you had an interest-bearing instrument and the state took the interest-bearing instrument and they gave you back the principal but not the interest, I see takings arguments in that. But I'm trying to reconcile these staff comments. They're very important to me. So maybe as we go forward, we could address that a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to address it now, or we can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, To be blunt, we agree with you. We don't actually see any takings issue because in fact, we are simply holding the property in a custodial capacity. That's it. And so I've done some brief research, but generally speaking, the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, as well as Wyoming's Constitution, the government can take property. They just can't take property without just compensation. And so in this context, first and foremost, we're not taking any property. That property is just sitting in an account here, waiting for the owner to come forward to claim that property. At which time, once they've established true ownership, then we will give them their property back. Again, with the amount that comes to us is going to be the amount that they're going to get. There are some. The only caveat to that is there may be some fees that may be deducted. For example, if there's property in a safety deposit box and there's a contract that exists as far between the owner and the bank, and that contract says that the owner of that property is responsible for drilling fees. That's an example. We may deduct, if the bank in turning over that property to us deducts those drilling fees, then that's the amount of property that the owner would get. It would be, the amount of property minus that fee. But by all means, as far as a takings situation is concerned, we don't see that. It's often raised in the context of unclaimed property. But even again, if there's a taking, and again, recognizing that takings are only prohibited if there is no just compensation given. Just compensation would be provided because upon filing their claim and processing their claim and showing ownership, we would in fact give them their property, which whether that constitutes compensation for the taking, I don't know. I think that's semantics. They're getting what they have.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I totally see that with physical assets, like what comes out of a safe deposit box. They get the gold watch back, It's these interest-bearing assets that, you're only giving them back the principal of whatever the item was, or the value of it at the time you took it. But they had an expectation, perhaps, that it was going to be in an interest-bearing account. And after so many years, it would have been worth a lot more. So is there a takings issue with respect to that interest or not? I mean, potentially. So that's the only point I make. Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess at this point is the way I'm proceeding, is that sufficient? Mr. Chairman, am I getting in too deep or?
No, you're doing good.
Thank you. I believe we left off on Article 4, page 54. This addresses reports by holders. So Section 401 on page 55 addresses that reports are required by the holder. Page 56, Section 402 addresses the contents of the report. Line 3 on page 56, RUPA had a must, so the report required under Wyoming Statute 343401 must. We changed that to shall. Page 58, lines 1 through 3, we added language that allows a holder to report property that is all belonging to the same owner as if it's below a $50 threshold. Generally, and I apologize for the flipping back, page 56, lines 14 through 19, one of the requirements for the report is the property to be reported is to be $50 or more. But on page 58, lines 1 through 3, if there is property under $50, but it belongs to the same owner, then that is also to be reported. Section 403 on page 58 addresses when the report is to be filed. It's a November 1 deadline, same as our current act, so there wouldn't be any change as far as administrative changes. Page 59, section 404 addresses retention of records by the holder. It's a 10-year record retention following submission of the report. Page 61, section 405 addresses property reportable and payable or deliverable absent owner demand. And that does it for Article 4. Article 5 on page 61 addresses notice to the apparent owner of the property presumed abandoned. Section 501 requires notice to be provided to the apparent owner by the holder that they would be turning property over to the Unclaimed Property Division. On page 62, Section 502 addresses the contents of that notice, and there is specific language that is to be included in that notice. Page 64, page 64, lines 5 and 6, in addition to the other requirements that the original act required, we also added that notice include the name, address, and email address or telephone number of the holder, so that if the apparent owner in fact receives that notice, they have the information necessary to reach back out to the holder. Page 64, section 503, notice by the administrator. We did remove language here that required the administrator to send letters to all owners of property that are in our possession. We did not have that requirement, or we do not have that requirement in our existing act, and quite frankly is a pretty onerous and expensive process. That said, we still are required to maintain a website database that's accessible to the public, and otherwise we provide notice to the administrators through other databases and sources. Page 65, lines 4 through 6. We added language here that would allow us to use additional databases to verify the identity of apparent owners and their last known addresses. We currently do this. We have databases that we utilize. This gives us a specific authority to use those. Lines 11 through 15 on page 65, we also added language here that allows us to enter into interagency agreements with other government entities and use their databases to identify apparent owners of abandoned property. And interagency agreements under that section shall include protection of confidential information. There are other states that are joining forces with Secretary of State's offices, election offices, using voter registries to verify names and addresses. And so while we haven't done that in Wyoming, this would give us the authority to do such. Section 65, on page 65, section 504, addresses cooperation among state officers and agencies to locate apparent owners. We currently work with other states and is authority that we currently have. Page 66, Article 6 addresses taking custody of property by the administrator. Section 601 addresses and defines good faith. Generally speaking, good holders are required to report in good faith, and so that's why this definition is here. Page 67, section 602 addresses dormancy charges. So a holder could deduct a charge as long as there is a contract between the holder and the apparent owner that allows for such a charge. Page 68, section 603, payment or delivery of property to the administrator. This talks about when the payment or delivery of property is to be turned over to the administrator, which generally speaking is when the report is filed. We did modify language on page 69, lines 6 through 9. This is specific to tangible property and safety deposit boxes. And instead of delivering, concurrently with the report, tangible property in a safety deposit box shall not be delivered to the administrator until a mutually agreed upon date that's no sooner than 60 days after the filing of the report. This is, practically speaking, allows us to ensure that we have sufficient space and security to house any tangible property that is to be turned over. Page 71, section 604, addresses the effect of payments or delivery on the property. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but on payment or delivery of property, the administrator under the act, the administrator as agent for the state assumes custody and responsibility for safekeeping of the property. And then we modified the language thereafter in lines 12 through 17. A holder that pays or delivers property to the administrator in good faith and substantially complies with Wyoming Statute 343501 and 502 is relieved of liability, which may arise or be in response to the property to the extent of the value of the property so paid or delivered. There was language after this that would have required the state to indemnify a holder. And so we did remove that language. Section 605. Section 605, page 71, recovery of property by the holder from the administrator. So this would be a circumstance where a holder has turned property over to the program, but then the owner has come forward to the holder and the holder has paid the owner, and so the holder would come back to us looking for reimbursement.
Your safety deposit boxes, so you actually have a facility somewhere that you're storing physical stuff at this point, or we're gonna have to create one?
Mr. Chairman, we do have space, and Mr. Robertson could tell you a bit more about that, but we do have secured space to store tangible property.
So are you in effect a free safety deposit box if I fail to pay mine, that you put it in storage for me and it sits forever there and I don't have to pay a fee? All I have to do is come back and retrieve it at some point?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with part of that comment. The bank has the authority to withhold fees, and we put that in our notes that they require fees back, that we would require you to do that. Part of existing Unclaimed Property Act, as well as the RUPA here, there is a time period of how long we would hold that. And then after that period of time, we are given the authority to have an auction and sell those contents.
Okay. I wasn't up on that, and thank you, that answer. Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Down this safety deposit box rabbit hole, but what about cash in a safety deposit box? Is there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen. If it's just typical cash, regular dollar bills, we will deposit that, and then it will show in the unclaimed property database as you have this much money in there. We do analyze if it's older bills or collectibles, then those are kept in our contents. We do not deposit those.
Thank you. Continue on.
Mr. Chairman, again, page 71, section 605 addresses recovery of property by the holder from the administrator. But turning to page 74, section subparagraph G, so lines 6 through 23, and then on to page 75, lines 2 through 10. We modified this language. The original RUPA allowed that for a administrative contested case process in the event that our office, the program, denied a claim for reimbursement by the holder. And so we eliminated that contested case process and instead replaced it with essentially the process that we have now, which just allows the holder to file a claim in district court. And so we, to my knowledge, have never actually had an action brought in district court. And so from our perspective, establishing a formal contested case process seemed a bit like overkill. Page 75, section 606 addresses property removed from the safety deposit box. As indicated before, it does allow for reimbursement for the cost of opening the box as long as there's a lien or a contract providing for reimbursement. We also added language that would allow us to deduct those expenses out of other property of the same holder. So if, as Mr. Robertson was explaining, sometimes a box has both tangible property as well as cash. If that's the case, we could use some of, the owner's cash to reimburse the cost there. Or if the property, maybe the owner has completely unrelated property, securities, bank accounts, something other than property associated with that box. If they have other cash that we are holding, that would allow us to reimburse that the bank or the financial institution with that incurred the drilling fees with proceeds of that cash. Page 76, section 607 addresses the administrator's options as to custody. We did, and this really addresses our ability to decline to take custody depending on certain circumstances. We added language that we currently have in our act in line 16 and 17 in the event that we would deem it in the best interest of the state. Mr. Chairman, that takes us to page 77. The first staff comment, we briefly discussed it earlier. And I didn't know if you have any additional discussion that you would like us to address on the staff comment regarding taking.
Okay. Well, how about if we go back to staff and maybe explain a little bit more in depth about it? And does it involve the kind of lost opportunity for income like I was talking about earlier, like the lost interest over the years, or is it, and they did mention that you auctioned some stuff. And so that's a physical, that is no longer exists if it's auctioned and sold. Maybe you get the value back for what was sold, but these are where the takings ideas come in, I think. Am I understanding that right? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, can I answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My main concern with the staff comment on page 77 is that it seems a little unclear when this property that's presumed abandoned could be, as you said, auctioned off or sold or what have you. I don't necessarily know, and I'm sure that the Treasurer's Office could probably give a little more information on this. I just don't necessarily know if the apparent owner would be given the chance or have the opportunity to take this property back before it was auctioned off. And from what I can tell, the statute's a little unclear as to how they'd be reimbursed or what have you. And then your concern regarding interest, I think, is a valid one as well. But this staff comment was mainly just meant for discussion by the committee, and then to have the Treasurer's Office explain certain things about the bill as well. And had I had a little bit more time with this bill, I would have had this discussion with the Treasurer's Office as well, and just had a little more clarity on it. So hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much. So, for example, in the case of the auction, you sell something. Obviously, the something doesn't exist anymore and the person can't get it back. But if an owner were to show up, do they get the proceeds of the auction? Would that be what happens?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, that's correct. In the event of a sale, we would hold the cash, the proceeds of the sale, and for hopefully eventual claim by the owner.
Mr. Chairman, but of course, let's just say it was a watch, okay, sold for $100 at the auction. And so years and years and years go by, you come back and say, I'm trying to track down what happened to Grandpa's watch. We now found that the bank, and then it went to the state. It looks like it was sold, and it was sold 20 years ago for $100. And that watch today would have been worth something, maybe or not. They don't have that watch. They have $100, but they don't get any interest for the $100 over all the years that they're waiting. So that's always bothered me about the unclaimed property program, is that people always give up the earnings or any accumulation, and the state is earning money off of this. I mean, all these monies are invested. Help me with that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I'll try to help you with that.
But it's the way it is, yeah.
Certainly, we're mindful of the sentimental side. There's not much that can be done once the watch is sold, and we recognize that. We do have authority for appraisers, as far as property is concerned, and we have the authority to not accept, an amount if we don't believe that it represents essentially fair market value. So, I guess if you want to call that as a certain safety net, it is there, but certainly we understand your concern. We also have not actually had any sales of unclaimed property to date. That's not to say we won't. Obviously, if we have authority, it's certainly possible, and that's the intent, but we haven't actually sold any.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I think I understand that there really isn't a takings in the sense of the value at the time. Where the takings comes in is this foregone opportunity over all the years. If it was an interest-bearing account, you lose the interest. If it was an heirloom that would have appreciated in market value, you lose the appreciation. If it's just sold and it's just a sentimental watch, it's not that great, but the state gets $100 for it, in 20 years, you get the $100. You don't get the $100 invested in an account. That's just the way it is. And the state benefits from all that because we get the interest. It's okay.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and particularly in this context, I'm worried about what happens if something gets sold for much less than what the actual value is. And I'll give a very personal example. I've got in my safe deposit box the engraver's proof for the Iwo Jima flag raising U.S. stamp, postage stamp. My father-in-law was the engraver at the United States Bureau of Engraving and Printing that engraved that. That particular proof is signed by the photographer that took the actual picture. That makes it a very unique item. I have absolutely no idea what the value is. Now, in this case, the state will never get it. My son's well aware of what it is and where it is, but something like that turns up. How the heck do you deal with it? How the heck do you even recognize what you got?
I don't even know it's something.
See, I think you answered part of it earlier, that you guys do appraise, but go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott. That's an excellent question. That is a challenge that we have. And when we go through the contents of a box, if there's any question at all that this may be of value, I mean, we make sure that we indicate that and try to identify it, but that is a challenge. It sounds like you've taken great steps to make sure that future generations know that it's there and doesn't get turned over to us. But we do utilize the appraisers, and hopefully we bring in people who know what they're doing in specified areas. And, if it's, old coins, things like that, your specific example would be very challenging to try to figure out a determination for that.
So I'll comment just a little, and I think you addressed it, is anything that has value, there's a responsibility to the owner of it to make sure it stays in the right hands. I mean, be it a bank account or a stack of gold coins, it's in a safety deposit box. And to my end, I think there's some responsibility on the person that has it to pay that fee on the box and to let family or whoever know. And so to give up something because the state kept custody of it for 20 years, I don't think it's a taking at all. It's something that I think you should all be very proud of. I've gone back and pried back some family money out of the unclaimed property. It's a pretty easy process, and I'm pretty thankful to have it. Didn't know it was there. My mother had left some stuff behind, and for my end, I wouldn't dare ask for interest on what it was. I was just happy to have anything back. And so for me, I think there's a fine line there on what's a taking and what's abandonment of property. And really what we've got is we're taking care of people's abandonment of property. And so I take a different approach if I was arguing it in court on the constitutionality of a taking. Is it actually a taking when you didn't exercise your ability to get it? Does that fall in line with any of where you folks are at? Because there's cost to the state to hold this as well, and administrative costs.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct. We take exactly that, that approach. And page 89, section 804 specifically says property received by the administrator under this act is held in custody for the benefit of the owner and is not owned by the state. So by all means, that is our perspective, that's our responsibility, and we do take that responsibility seriously.
Mr. Chairman, your point is very well taken, and I think it's absolutely correct for a lot of things, especially physical assets, But supposing it was something like one share of AT&T stock in 1963. And they was legal then, they probably had bearer shares, it's stuck in a drawer. Now, that thing is worth incredible amount of money, but it is really all the person would ever hope to get back is what the value of that was at the time the state took possession of it. Those can be two different things. And so it's kind of it's a necessary tool so that, these companies can deal with the orphan shares of stock. Banks can deal with orphan bank accounts. They don't have to keep them on their books forever. But I've always wondered about the balance. Physical assets, you're exactly right. It's these other things that bother me a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess have you sold shares of AT&T stock, or do you just hold the note of the certificate in trust? Because that was part of what I redeemed mine, was shares that were still on the books. So tell me your process.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and specifically Senator Case here. When it comes to shares, we have a sale once a year. The first business day in July, we will sell whatever shares are eligible to be sold. And we hold them for 3 years first before they're sold. A good 6 to 9 months before we do that sale, we run a report on everyone that's eligible, and we make an effort to try to contact every owner on there before we do that sale. So it's kind of a last-ditch effort. Before we make the sale, let's circle back and see if we can find these people before we do it.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you. Just curious as to how all of these scenarios have been contemplated by property belonging to the deceased or to a deceased family member. How does this operate within the probate code for the ability to reopen estates, and whether or not all of this property that evidently has been given to one member of a family, whether or not the proper way to distribute that was through a reopening of the estate and a distribution pursuant to the decedent's will or intestate laws?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, we would love for these estates to be reopened, and we actually try to encourage that when heirs and descendants come forward. More often than not, what we are told is they can't afford to hire an attorney to open the estate, or it puts us in this position of trying to give legal advice. We actually struggle with that fairly often, and sometimes we try to encourage other members. We go down the rabbit hole of trying to determine on our own then who the proper heirs are. Some of it depends on the dollar amount, but we try to work within the probate code as best as we can. Sometimes we require affidavits under the probate code for summary distributions. Again, we walk that fine line of not giving legal advice as to what they should put in those affidavits, but often what we run into is individuals that either don't have the financial means to go open the estate or seek an attorney to open the estate, or the dollar value is so low that it's just not worth their while to do so.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I do know that an heir and not even a lawyer is required to reopen an estate. Oftentimes creditors will begin a probate estate when the heirs really aren't interested in administering it and they know that there's a number of creditors. And so, Chase Credit Card Company can go open up an estate and administer the estate's assets and pay themselves as well as other creditors off. This is a common occurrence. So I guess I'm just questioning whether or not that's actually the challenge here. Certainly, I understand if we're talking about a $10 check that no one wants to waste their time or effort on. But if there's been any conversations with members of the judicial branch concerning providing any additional remedies associated with the reopening of some of these estates for these types of purposes, because that would seem to be most consistent with the law as opposed to a reversion to the state's treasurer's office.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, your point is well taken. I think we would love to have that interaction. We have not had that interaction with the courts, but certainly having a process that would be, I guess, an easier process that would allow individuals to open estates so that we could simply transfer this property to the estate. I think everybody benefits from that, even from a liability standpoint. I think that reduces the likelihood of our office, fingers being pointed at our office saying we paid the wrong heir. Whenever there is an estate, if there's a court order, of course, we comply with those court orders. We've also paid lien holders and others that have actually, been entitled to that property.
Moving on.
Page 78, section 608 addresses disposition of property having no substantial value. And so this contemplates situations where the value of the property is determined to be insubstantial. And that could just simply be it's worthless, or the value of dealing with the property, selling the property would be higher than the actual value of the property. In those circumstances, we can destroy or otherwise dispose of the property. This is similar language to what we currently have. Page 79, lines 1 through 4, we added language, and here we would make a good faith effort to secure and retain any document that appears to include a password or passcode, and that information could be retained in electronic copy. Again, this is more in the safety deposit box, context, but particularly with, virtual currency and, keys, stuff like that, not physical keys, but pass keys, those being placed in safety deposit boxes. This would give us the authority and require us to make a good faith effort to secure those passwords and passcodes.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but I think I remember staff saying they had a concern that maybe we should address on page 79. Hope that's appropriate, and I hope I have the right page.
I think you do.
Mr. Chairman, okay.
Yeah.
So this is just another staff comment regarding the potential of an unconstitutional taking. It's just meant for the committee's discussion. But I will tell you that the language in subsection A is exactly the language that is currently in statute now. It was mainly meant as a discussion point, but I was a little concerned about the language on line 15, which is the expiration before. Using the word before could potentially lead to an unconstitutional taking, and I just put the staff comment there because the committee may wish to consider omitting the word before in line 15.
Would that do any damage? Mr. Chairman, would that be a reasonable amendment?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, removing before on line 15, page 79? Yeah, we would be fine with that.
Continue on. What?
All right, so moving on to page 80, Article 7, sale of property by the administrator. Again, we've touched on this, but section 701 does allow for public sale of the property after holding it for 3 years if we determine it to be in the best interest of the state. The process is outlined there. Page 82, section 702 allows for disposal of securities. Unless deemed by the administrator to be in the best interest of the state, we shall not sell or otherwise liquidate a security until 3 years after the administrator receives the security. Again, that language, line 16 and 17 is we added the unless deemed by the administrator to be in the best interest of the state. That language is currently in our act, and we carried it over to this revision. Page 83, section 703, recovery of securities or value by the owner. So there is this process, and hopefully this may address some concerns, depending on when the owner comes forward to claim securities. If it's within the first 3 years, then they are entitled to replacement of the security if that is available. Otherwise, they're entitled to the market value of the security at the time the claim is filed, plus dividends, interest, and other increments of the security up to the time the security was sold. If the claim is made after the 3-year period, page 84, then they are entitled to if the security is in our custody, they're entitled to the security plus dividends, interest, and other increments on that security, or the net proceeds of the sale of the security plus dividends, interest, and other increments on the security. Page 84, section 704, a purchaser owns the property after the sale, or addresses a purchaser who owns property after the sale. Essentially, they take it free and clear. Page 85, section 705 carves out an exception or exemption from sale of military medals or decorations. And so there are some places that we can turn those types of properties, medals or decorations, over to military veterans organizations, and the agency that awarded the medal or decoration, or a government entity. Page 86, Article 8 addresses administration of property. And in this section 801, lines 17 through 23, and lines 1 through 15 on page 87, we carried the language over from our existing act. And essentially, this is where the money that we receive is to be placed in which account, in the unclaimed property investment earnings account, and so on. So there would be no change in where that money is going or how it would be handled from our existing act. Page 87, section 802 addresses the administrators to retain records of the property. Page 88, section 803 addresses expenses and service charges of the administrator. Page 89, section 804, property received by the administrator under this act is held in custody for the benefit of the owner and is not owned by the state. Article 9 addresses claims to recover property from the administrator. So section 901 addresses claims of another state to recover property from our program. Page 90, section 902 addresses when property is subject to recovery by another state. Page 93, section 903 addresses claims for property by the person claiming to be the owner. This I will point out, beginning on lines 18 through 20 on page 93, and then carrying over onto page 94, this is the abbreviated process for owners to claim sums under $2,500. And typically this is done just simply based on data matching. So instead of requiring the owner to have to submit a claim for that, if we have sufficient data, that would allow us to kick out essentially a payment to an individual, then it would allow us to do that, and the owner would not have to submit their own claim. Page 94, section 904, when an administrator shall honor a claim for property. This was another spot, lines 20 through 23, and lines 1 through 14. We combined RUPA language with our existing language, and as far as the timelines and the process. So, page 96, section, line 96, lines 9 through 17, I will point out, this is the abbreviated process for low dollar claims for heirs. And so this is a $500 limit. And so an heir may submit just an affidavit to claim amounts that are $500 or lower. You get into a low dollar value there. It's a lot of folks are either unwilling, or it's just not worth their time to try and find great grandpa's or great grandmother's will or trust, or to try to figure out whether or not it was probated. Page 96, section 905 allows for, allowance of claims for property. Page 98, section 906 addresses actions by a person whose claim is denied. And again, this is essentially language that our current act allows for. They can submit a claim in district court to determine ownership. Page 99 starts Article 10, verified reports of property, examination of the records. And so section 1001 addresses the verified report of property. Page 100, section 1002 addresses examination of records to determine compliance. So this allows us to conduct examinations of holders to determine that they are in fact complying with their responsibilities as holders. And so section 1003 on page 101 establishes rules for conducting those examinations. Section 102, page 102, section 1004 addresses records that are obtained in an examination and how we are to handle them. And they are to be maintained as confidential, and we are to use security provisions of Article 14. Oftentimes what we're looking at is obviously business records of those holders. Page 104, section 1005 addresses evidence of unpaid debt or undischarged obligations, and allows us to make payments to satisfied unpaid debts. Again, we require sufficient either court order or other documentation that establishes evidence of that debt. And so this would allow a holder to obtain or to provide documentation that the debt has been paid and has been discharged. Page 106, section 1006 addresses failure of a person examined to retain records. So this, if a holder fails to retain records, then we can use a reasonable method of estimation based on other properties, similar properties, to determine the amount of property that they should turn over to the program. Page 107, section 1007 addresses administrators' contracts with another to conduct the examination. So this allows our office to enter into contracts with third parties to conduct these examinations or audits of holders. We currently do that and have contracts with several audit companies. Page 108, section 1008 addresses determination of liability for unreported and reportable property. And that finishes off Article 10. Article 11 on page 108 addresses determination of liability and putative holder remedies. So section 1101 allows a holder to initiate an informal conference with our office after we determine, or in the event we determine that they have not maintained records or properly paid property to our office. And so that's this review process in 1101, which ultimately ends with the ability of the holder to seek action in district court upon our office issuing a final determination after that final review. Section 1102 on page 112 is review of the administrator's determination. As I just indicated, allows them to seek a judicial remedy, which is addressed in 1103. Article 12 addresses enforcement by the administrator. Section 1201 addresses or allows us to seek judicial action to enforce liability. We added language on page 113, lines 8 through 12 and 14 through 20. Section subparagraph B there, it indicates that we are an indispensable party to any judicial or administrative proceedings concerning disposition and handling of unclaimed property that is or may be payable or distributable into the protective custody of the administrator. And then paragraph C, we have a right to intervene and participate in judicial or administrative proceedings when doing so would be in the best interest of the state, the apparent owner, or the unclaimed property, or to conserve or safeguard the unclaimed property against dissipation, undue diminishment, or adverse discriminatory treatment. Section 1202 addresses interstate and international agreements and cooperation. Section 1203 on page 114 addresses actions involving another state or foreign country. Page 117, section 1204 addresses interest and penalties for failing to act in a timely manner. This is specific to holders. Section 1205 on page 117 addresses other civil penalties in addition to those set forth in 1204. Page 119, section 1206, this gives us the program the ability to waive interest and penalties, and we do that sometimes with audits, actually oftentimes with audits, to encourage cooperation and to bring holders into compliance, assuming that they are cooperating and working with our office. Article 13 on page 119 addresses agreements to locate property of an apparent owner held by the administrator. So here there are companies out there that individuals contract with, we'll call them asset finders. And so that's what this section addresses, 1301, when an agreement to locate property is enforceable. Section 1302 on page 120 addresses when those agreements to locate property are void. On page 121, lines 12 through 15, we modified this language. The original RUPA language used an unconscionable amount language, and instead we changed it to a 20%. So it caps the asset finder's fee at 20%, as opposed to the original language being an unconscionable amount. And that amount was simply determined based on discussion and review of other state acts that have that language. Page 122, Article 14, confidentiality and security of information. Our existing act does not contain this language, but it is, and as we're finding more and more important, 1401 addresses and defines personal information, so the type of information that is going to be protected. And 1402, confidential information, specifically indicates that the following information are confidential and otherwise exempt from public inspection. So this would be a carve out from the Public Records Act. These types of records in our possession would not be subject to dissemination of the Public Records Act under this exception. And basically, those are the records of the administrator that are related to administration, reports and records of the holders, personal information of owners, and so on. Page 124, 1403, when confidential information may be disclosed. So this section gives us guidance as to when we can disclose confidential information. Section 1404 on page 126 gives us authority to enter into confidentiality agreements so that we can disclose information so long as that information can remain confidential. Article 15 are miscellaneous provisions. 1501, uniformity of application and construction. 1502, relation to the Electronic Signatures and Global and National Commerce Act. 1503 on page 128 are transitional provisions. 1504, severability. And then beginning on page 129, at line, I guess it would be 9, but below, these are all conforming amendments, all of which except one are to change references from the existing Uniform Unclaimed Property Act to what would be the revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. And the one that I indicated as different is on page 134. Well, it begins on 134, lines 21 and 22, but the substance is on 135, lines 6 through 8. This language, G indicates that benefits due and owing from a life insurance policy or a retained asset account, plus any applicable accrued contractual interest shall first be payable to the designated beneficiary. So the beneficiary, of course, would be entitled to the benefits plus any applicable accrued interest under that insurance contract. But the second line goes on to say, if the beneficiary cannot be found, the insurer shall comply with the applicable provisions of the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. And the next sentence carved out an exception saying that that interest otherwise payable as required shall not be considered unclaimed property pursuant to 3424-120A. So it, for whatever reason, removed interest from being turned over, even though the full benefit would otherwise be payable. We reached out to the Department of Insurance, and they looked into that carve out that exception on there, and they couldn't come up with any real logical, strong reason to have that exception. And so they were amenable to striking that language so that in the event a designated beneficiary cannot be found, not only would the benefits that are due and owing be turned over to unclaimed property, but also the contractual interest. And the remainder sections are all conforming, simply to change the statutes from the existing references to new numbering. And otherwise, it would be effective in July. Mr. Chairman, that's a lot. We recognize that. Appreciate everyone taking the time today to go through that. So with that, we would stand for questions.
Any questions? See none. Good job. Senator Case.
What would be the impact of if we were to restructure the unclaimed property law to provide earnings to the claimant, share the earnings that the state gets? So provide half the earnings net of any costs with the claimant. I realize that's not something we do, but what would be the financial impact of that? Because I'm guessing most property probably doesn't get claimed. So you can't say it's half the whole earnings of unclaimed property, but it'd be some percentage we'd be losing. How much would that be if we were to do that? That would seem more fair to me. And eliminate the takings, I think.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, the actual financial impact, I don't know at this point. The interest does pay for running the program. And so to that end, we'd have to look at the cost of running the program and also see what that scenario would look like.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Nobody online? Do we have anybody in the audience that wishes to testify on unclaimed property? Wow, big dollars, big issue.
It's been
Big
posted for
bills,
3 days.
Got that. Yeah, I think it'd
You
be the
might be
same.
surprised.
Some of those are drinks too.
So committee, what is your pleasure? It's been posted for 3 days, been pointed out. Do we want to, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, and I'm prepared to make a motion if the chairman wants. Frankly, I think this is an important topic. I think the bill is probably all right, but it has only been out for the public to see it for, I think the testimony was since Monday. You've got, interest ownership of property is one of the fundamental rights we have. So it's dealing with a pretty important topic, and I'm less disturbed the fact I didn't have time to read it. I didn't get it in time, but some of the groups that are concerned with protecting private property rights, I think ought to take a look at this. Some of the outfits, particularly I'm thinking of the Bankers Association and whatnot, probably needs to take a hard look at this to make sure we're not doing something. It is a uniform act, and that makes me nervous that there may be some governmental fundraising in here. Mr. Chairman, what I'm going to suggest is that the proper course is that this came to us so late, and the staff has raised some concerns about the length of time they had to deal with it. What I'm going to suggest is that we carry it forward to the next interim. This is a start on something I think it's very much needed, but I don't think we have had the time to work it properly as an interim bill, Mr. Chairman.
Absent objection, I agree with that. Comments, committee? Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question for the department is any practices, what's the impact if we delay this for another year? Is there an impact in your mind?
40 years.
Another year? One more. I know it's been 40 years, Senator, yes. But if there is any pressing need, hundreds of thousands on the line, I know I would say a lot of work went into it last minute, and but I would like to know what practical considerations, if we don't adopt the Model Act in 2023, are.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, practically speaking, there's really no impact. It's business as usual. As it's been pointed out, our existing law has been in place for 40 years, or 30 years, excuse me. And, we'll just keep doing what we do.
Further comments? I think with that, we're laid back on to our next interim. We'll visit with Management Council when it comes. I think this topic's worthy of that. Thank you very much. Anna, thank you for the hard work on this on short notice. That brings us up to liquor laws. We are 11:41. We'll start with Bill Draft 23 LSO 129 retail liquor license fees. And who we got on this now? Josh, welcome again. This bill's shorter, I take it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson also, definitely shorter than the last one. This was a bill that you all saw at the August meeting. And what this bill would do is, on page 2, Mr. Chairman, a new retail liquor license issued after July 1, 2023 would not have a limit on the amount of that initial fee.
provided that the amount shall not be less than $300. Then the bill would provide that the annual ongoing fee after that would be not less than $500, no more than $2,500. Those amounts were requested again at that last meeting. Just would note that currently those amounts are not less than 300 or more than 1,500. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. Take any questions?
Questions for Josh? Questions for Josh? Seeing none. Do we have anybody from Liquor Commission? I believe we do. Have comments of any kind? No comments there. Guy sitting right behind you, I think might want to talk. Mr. Mosier? Here for funeral homes or something?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having this party so I could come. Mike Mosier, Wyoming State Liquor Association, addressing House Bill 23 LSO-0129. The first part of this bill, Mr. Chairman, I think everybody agrees on because it deals with initial fees for newly created full retail liquor licenses. Not dissimilar to what we did with bar and grills. The reason we set the threshold for bar and grills was so high was to allow cities to charge a higher amount for the initial fee. So I think you'll hear everybody's fine with that. Now, the second part, we oppose, not surprisingly. It's a 60% increase on certain liquor businesses, not all of them. I've had a joke for years on how you get a conservative to vote for a tax increase, and the answer is you call it a fee. A fee by definition is an amount of money charged for a service. However, when that fee is being raised to profit, it's now effectively a tax, and that applies, committee, whether you're talking about a hunting license, a fishing license, a driver's license. The amount is to reimburse the governing authority for the administration and process of that license fee. A couple things. First of all, I realize that the cost of labor has gone up a tad. However, the amount of money being brought in has increased a lot more, not by license fee increases, but by number of liquor licenses. In the 70s, Cheyenne had approximately 35 liquor licenses of all types. Now we have 92. Also, we're not using manual typewriters anymore, and we're not running around with a hammer and nail and nailing notices up anymore. And so the process is considerably streamlined with IT, et cetera. One of the things you might hear about the need for full retail licensees is the cost of law enforcement. However, this fee is for the processing of the license and not for protection money. Now, if we were to ascertain the cost of the municipality or county for the cost of law enforcement, I would toss out the possibility there are a number of large retailers or convenience stores that have a lot more police calls than the restaurant down the street with a full retail liquor license. And so when we throw in other things, you can do a tax or a special fee. I probably shouldn't use protection money. That sounds a little too mafia. But the idea of reimbursing the city for the cost of additional police calls, if you're going to do that, look at every business in the state that uses police calls. Also, one thing I'll point out, this isn't fair because I mentioned 92 licenses in Cheyenne. There are 39 full retail licenses in the city of Cheyenne. For those 39 retailers, their cost is going up over 60%, but the other licensees aren't being affected. Now, I don't know how much you know about the process, but when you process a liquor license, the only difference between processing a full retail license versus a restaurant license is the box you check. Same process, same everything. And so I've never heard anything in testimony, unless I missed it, about the cost of collection or the cost of processing a license increasing. I've heard other things like, we want more money, and we certainly understand wanting more money. The other thing, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, is the size of businesses. Too often we hear that these businesses are rolling in dough and making bunches and bunches of money. There are over 740 licensees that would be affected by this 60% fee increase, potentially. Most of those businesses are very small. I had a pretty busy place, but there were still times you hold back your paycheck to make sure your employees could clear theirs. And so increasing something that much on so many businesses that are quite small and family run, I don't really see as fair. Now, what we're doing is taking the same type of businesses and targeting specific ones for a significant fee, or as I would say, tax increase. Now, if you're talking revenue generation committee, the first part of this bill does quite a bit. If the city of Cheyenne or Casper or Jackson gets a full retail, they could potentially make a boatload of money off that initial fee. That's going to make up a lot in the whole process, and certainly would pay for a lot of processing liquor licenses. So my suggestion, committee, now, if the cost of this service has gone up, then look at all liquor licenses and tweak them all a little bit. I wouldn't say I would support that, but at least it would be fair, equitable, and would make more sense. But the idea of targeting one specific type of liquor license, because just for the sin of having that license. To give you an idea, committee, there's a business here in town that had a full retail that just switched to a bar and grill. Well, it's the same business. It's just that they changed the type of liquor license. And I'll toss out that a lot of municipalities have nothing but full retail licenses because nobody really wants them. They're just happy somebody wants them. And so what you'd see is a lot of people gravitate toward more inexpensive renewal fees. So my suggestion, committee, is keep the bill, get rid of lines 6 through 10, because I think they do two completely different things. One does something that everybody agrees with. One does something that is inequitable, that is, I feel, unfair, and is basically a tax increase. If we want to talk about fees on liquor licenses increasing due to workload, I can see having that discussion, but it's something that would affect all liquor licensees because we all go through the same process. And also, I would recommend eliminating lines 6 through 10 simply for the survival of the bill. We do not oppose the language prior to lines 6 through 10, but we do afterwards. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done gnashing my teeth and tearing my sackcloth. I'll take questions.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do need to note that I own a company that has a liquor license in Lander, Wyoming. And then I have a question also. I think this paragraph on page 2 is kind of confusing because the language, the new language on lines 7 through 10, in my mind, when I first read it, I thought we're talking about 2 levels of fees, not 1 level of fee, because it kind of suggests that. This is about issuing a new license, new retail liquor license. And then it says after issuing a retail liquor license under this section, which means a new retail liquor license, you can charge an annual fee of $500. And what I'm getting at is that people that had previously had a license that weren't issued a new license under this section, they wouldn't, it could be argued that they shouldn't get the $500. So I think the language is confusing on its face.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, thank you for saying that because I was confused. And so I contacted different people because I don't know if the intent was to say just these liquor licenses, but the way it reads in subsection E to most of the people I've talked to is that it applies to all types of liquor licenses. Now, there's a section, and Mr. Montoya would know this much better than I, that says in Title 12 that all licenses must be treated the same. So you really can't say, we're charging this kind of higher renewal fee than the other one, which is why we're doing an initial fee and not a renewal fee. But I was confused too, and I know other people that were confused. And I think when you read the bill, you can take it both ways. But in the way we read it now, it says it's a renewal fee for all, increase for all 740 some businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Follow up on that question. So as I was thinking about this, the local licensing authority, in my mind, could charge a different price per license, but you're telling me there's likely a statute somewhere else that says all licensees have to be the same. Because I appreciate the argument, there are some family businesses and some small mom and pops in the game, but the game really is a closed market system, and you have some larger players and some smaller players, but I mean, they're all not really at threat of competition amongst anyone outside of their own circle. That's why we have a protected system. But you're telling me you don't believe we, a local licensing authority, could say if your retail sales are under a certain threshold, here is your annual fee, and if your retail sales are over a certain threshold, they could assess a different fee, the way this bill reads?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, yes. And I could go back and grab my Title 12 and find the statutory reference, but I have somebody sitting right behind me that could probably just say that section off the top of their heads, and I'm not naming any names, but you probably.
Further questions? Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Do we have any more testimony in the audience? We do. Welcome, Ms. Hartstreet.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, almost afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association, which we are a 501c4 think tank with a 501c3 research arm. Our mission is to advocate for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. Usually I come before you on positions that we take are based on an analysis of the legislation against the cornerstones of taxation. Today, though, I am here to visit about fees. Although fees are not traditionally considered a tax, we believe it becomes a tax when its goal is to generate revenue instead of covering the cost of services. We have created a fee position analysis where we take the concepts of the cornerstones of taxation and evaluate the imposition of the fee for the cost of service. Some of the questions we ask: is there data to justify the fee? Does the fee impose equal and uniform liabilities upon similarly situated taxpayers? Does the user fee provide stable revenue to support the cost and the use of the service? And finally, is the fee transparent, accountable, and audible? Mr. Chairman, based off that criteria and careful consideration, we do oppose specifically the last half of the added language in the draft bill, lines 6 through 10, as it fails to be sound tax policy for the following reasons. It is not justified, as we believe this fee is in lieu of tax for revenue generation rather than covering the cost of the service. As mentioned in previous testimony or potential testimony, the primary cost of service is for increased law enforcement. In this case, there is no change in how the primary service is provided. We believe the intent of this increase is primarily to raise revenue, as the 60% fee increase is not segregated to cover any cost of service and goes directly to the municipality or county's general fund. It is not equitable, as the increased fee disadvantages one taxpayer over another and targets full retail liquor license holders. And Senator Case just found another reason why with the new license holders versus old license holders. We did evaluate if this user fee would provide stable revenue to support the cost and use of service, and considered if this fee creates stability for long-term funding. However, I'm going to talk in circles, since there was no justification in the increase of fee to cover the cost of service, or there is no charge and change in the process of renewal, the intent of this increase is not created to support stable funding for the cost of service. It will just cost the licensee 60% more to apply for the same thing they received before. For all those reasons stated above, the fee is not transparent, as it is tied to maintenance, or it's not tied to a maintenance or specific use of a service. There is not a clear or transparent use of the fee increase. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Needs to be arrested. Welcome.
members of the committee. My name is Bob McLaurin. I'm with WHAM. I hate to follow Mike Mosier, and actually they're very good, but we take a little bit different view on this bill. We do agree that the first part of it is the most important part of this bill, and ask for your favorable consideration of that. With respect to the $1,500 fee, I would point out a couple of things. You have to consider the cost of law enforcement as part of the whole package. 75% of the law enforcement calls in Jackson are alcohol related. 40% of the calls at the City of Casper Police Department are alcohol related. So it's not, from our perspective, and I realize there's not agreement on this, that is part of the cost of issuing the license. And quite honestly, our police department, when I was working for the town of Jackson, we didn't respond to a lot of restaurant fights, but we responded to a fair amount of bar fights. We do believe that it's not unreasonable. I would ask that if you're inclined to agree with Mr. Mosier and Ms. Harspeth, that you would break this into two bills and that we could have a discussion about the fee portion in a separate bill, because we are in agreement with the first portion of the bill. And the last thing I would point out, excuse me, is that this fee has been at $1,500 since 1935. And if you run an inflation calculator on that, of $1,500 in 1935 is about $30,000 in today's dollars. I do believe Mr. Mosier makes a fair point in having a broader discussion about fees. So I think that's why it makes some sense to have a separate bill to talk about that in a larger context. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, when you said 40%, I believe, of the calls in Casper were for alcohol related?
Approximately.
How many of that 40% is at bars or restaurants or?
I don't have that information, Representative. I just asked the
Can
question.
you get that information, sir?
Yes, sir. I'll try to chase that down.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Further testimony in the audience? Further testimony? No one online?
Mr. Chairman, we have Representative Sweeney online.
Very good. You got to him sooner. My bad. Maybe. There he is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee. So my recollection from your last meeting was a variety of different issues brought forth by, my recollection on this one is Cheyenne and others. I don't know if I'm in agreement with in total with the concept, but I think the thought process was, if you're limited by obviously census data and you receive a new liquor license, that the municipalities wanted the ability to get more revenue because of the process is so stringent. And so I think that's where the bill comes from. I would be in agreement. I don't think you need a second bill. But if the committee determined next interim to study that, I guess that would be a way to handle that. But I would ask that, starting with the added period on line 6, page 2, the rest of that probably needs to be amended out. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to testify.
Any questions for Representative Sweeney? Thank you. Do we have any further testimony? Public testimony is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure? Co-chairman moved it, second by Mr. Ayers. Okay. Discussion on the bill or amendments. Bill's moved, so we can either split it or move it the way it is and take amendments. Right it. You're going to amend it, so state your amendment. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move an amendment starting on line 7. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with the glare on my glasses.
New language, line 7 through 10.
Yes, line 7 through 10, strike all the new language.
Great. Seconded. Discussion. Mr. Co-chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So if we remove this language, I don't understand what then prohibits the local licensing authority from setting the fee really for whatever they want, unless we're going to delete the word new up on line 2. I mean, there's at least a protection factor between 500 and 2,500. But maybe Mr. Montoya or someone else can tell me what happens if this is deleted. Then what is a renewal fee? And wouldn't that also be set by the local licensing authority? I just want to make sure they know what they're asking for.
I think you're on something. Mr. Montoya. You're definitely on something. After you
Not sure what else protected.
struck out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Montoya, Wyoming Department of Revenue Liquor Division Administrator. To answer your question, Chairman Swanitzer, you would also have to reinstate the language on line 6 where they struck it out, nor more than $1,500. That's the renewal fee. Whatever numbers you put in there is up to you, but that's what needs to be put back in.
Senator Scott.
Chairman, if it's not put back in, then the municipalities would then have discretion. And aren't we trying to give the municipalities more discretion in their fundraising? So I think if you don't, if you just remove those new lines and don't put that back in, you've given the municipalities discretion in this item.
Without discussing the policy choice behind that, would that also be correct in your interpretation, Mr. Montoya?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, it could be correct. However, you would still be in conflict with 12.4.101D. And basically, it's a simple statute. It says, unless otherwise provided, the licensing authority shall uniformly assess license or permit fees annually per each particular class of license or permit. So what that is saying is that each retail within a jurisdiction has to have the same fees, issuance fees, renewal fees. So they would at least have to adopt that through municipal code or something like that to be in compliance with statute.
Chairman.
Go ahead, or you want it back? It's all you.
I don't know where to proceed.
Well, I guess hearing that testimony, the maker of the motion and the second, I guess we'll check to see if they want to revise their motion or continue as currently on the table. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will revise my motion to include the struck language on 6 and 7.
Okay.
Second agrees with that? Okay.
Second agrees, so further discussion. Question called. All in favor of the amendment? Say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.
No.
All in favor, raise your hand. Oh, I'm a conflict as well. I better do that. I better do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed, 8. Okay, 2 conflict. Kale, your conflicts in our case. Driscoll's conflict as well. So that is passed. We're back on the bill, first half of it anyway. Further discussion? Mr. Co-Chairman.
I'm believing, and correct me if I'm wrong, we probably need to delete the word new on line 2, now with that amendment being passed. So this is issuing a retail liquor license with those new amounts, or with those current amounts of 300 to 1,500, which is currently in statute. So now
Right.
I'm not sure what the bill does. So with that, Mr. Chairman, let me make a motion, since I don't think this changes current statute at all now, to delete the word new on line 2 and change those thresholds to 500 and 2,000, but that's not going to make. I'm thinking of my motion, Mr. Chairman, but I don't think we've done anything to the bill now with that amendment that it does anything.
You're correct.
More than it currently does. So I'm having difficulty on how to proceed. I guess I'd
kill
like
the
some
bill.
discussion.
Further discussion? Question being called.
Keep it going and amend it later.
That's true.
Roll call at this point, unless you want to. Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, as it stands now, license fee for issued shall be issuing a new liquor license shall be in the amount determined by the licensee authority, provided the amount shall be not less than $300
Or more than,
more. So that applies to new, and then there isn't a statute then. Mr. Chairman, we've I think we've messed it up.
Yeah, that's
Is
why we-
basically what we've done. The intent of the bill was all along was to have a new fee that was much more open-ended. And that does have some virtue in terms of how do you allocate the new ones.
Bring Mr. Mercer up.
Mr. Chairman, what I want to suggest is that if you want to, what we ought to do is back up and reinstate the new language, but use different numbers. Maybe just a small increase for inflation, or maybe no increase.
that's a new amendment, we can do that.
Can I ask
Mr.
Chairman,
Montoya.
can I ask Mr. Montoya
Yeah.
if that reading is correct, and what would happen if the statute goes into place as currently written?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. If they accept the Duncan amendment, okay, then it's just going to be, it just says the license fee to be assessed for issuing a new retail liquor license. I think where the confusion is coming in is what is a new retail liquor license? That doesn't mean new as of today, okay? On the liquor license application, if the licensing authority has a pool of licenses and somebody comes in to apply for one, that would be a new, and they check the box for a new license, okay? So the draft with the Duncan amendment, they could actually charge them $10,000, $15,000, whatever the licensing authority sets, okay? But the renewal every year then would revert back to the $300 to $1,500 or whatever dollar amounts you decide to come up with. But that's how this bill would read then, so.
Thank you. So it does actually have some import, they can.
It does, exactly, Mr. Chairman. The licensing authority would set the issuance on a new. A new would still be, for instance, if the ABC bar in Matitsi were to be in business for 20 years, they relinquish their license because they just decided to retire. They couldn't sell it. It goes into the pool of the licensing authority. Okay, somebody comes to apply for that, that is a new license.
Mr.
Mr.
Montoya.
Chairman.
So a transfer is not a new license, though.
Mr. Chairman, no, a transfer is not a new license. There's a set fee in statute for a transfer.
Thank you. Questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
Chairman, if we were to reinstate the, drop the amendment we've adopted, and reinstate the new language, but with, say, different numbers, say, go back to $300 instead of $500 on line 9, and $1,500 on line 10, you'd have the same fees that there now is for an existing license. Would that, is that necessary to make this thing work? And would that work?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it would, Senator Scott, it would be a bit redundant. To clean it up, really the Duncan amendment would clean it up if you want to have that initial fee for a new license at whatever the local licensing authority wants to set it at. I would imagine with 122 different licensing authorities, there'll be 122 different fees. But then the renewal fees, and if they just use again, the Duncan amendment, it would be between $300 and $1,500. If you want to mess with those numbers, that's up to you. But that's what the renewal would be for full retail licenses. So the second part really isn't necessary.
So,
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, thank
Be
you.
confused, Senator Scott?
So, Mr. Montoya, the bill as amended with the Duncan amendment, is it necessary and will it make a difference?
I'm sorry, one more time.
The bill as amended, does it change our liquor laws currently?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, it only changes in the fact as far as initial issuance dollar amount. Doesn't really change the liquor laws. It's just fees for the licensing authorities.
Does it do anything else, Mr. Montoya?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, no.
Further questions? Okay, thank you. So where we stand at is we've got the first half there with the
Question.
question called. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 129, retail liquor license fees as amended. Senator Boner submitted an absentee vote of aye. Senator Case? Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Scott? Representative Blackburn? Representative Burt? Representative Clausen? Representative Duncan?
Aye.
Representative Baer? Representative LeBeau? Representative McGuire?
Aye.
Representative Roscoe? Chairman Driscoll?
Conflict.
Co-Chairman Zwanitzer?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 9 ayes, 1 no, 2 conflicts.
Senator Scott.
Microphone.
Mr. Chairman, I have a suspicion we have messed this up and that we are not achieving the purposes of it. I think harmless, because I think we'll have to fix it once it's been read carefully. I think we'll have to fix it in committee in the full legislature. I think we needed to put the old language, the language that we took out in lines 8 through 10 back in, but it's readily fixable in committee in the House.
further
Senator
comments?
Nethercott.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Scott. So it would be the remaining committee members' suggestion to those members of the public, the stakeholders that are interested in those fee increases, to sit down with the Taxpayers Association and Mr. Mosier to come to some type of compromise about what those fees look like. Otherwise, there is no hope for passage of the bill for anyone speaking candidly about a bill titled Retail Liquor License Fees in this new legislature.
Go, Chairman.
Oh, not a lot of comments, Mr. Chairman. I just say we keep saying we support our local elected officials, and we apparently don't support our local counties and cities to determine prices based on their areas to their own constituents. I don't exactly know what we're afraid of. We think the local licensing authorities are going to charge everybody the maximum and inhibit business in their communities. I don't think that's correct or true. So just another instance of, our local elected officials want more power and authority, and we don't want to give it to them. So I'm hoping in the session we can come up to some agreements and keep everybody happy as this moves forward.
Good. Further comments? Okay, we're going to run late for lunch, but I think we'll go ahead and run the next bill. Nope, you want to break for lunch?
Do you not sense that
There's
everyone's
a
ready to
chorus
come?
of
All right, we will adjourn for lunch then. It's 12:19. We'll come back at
Or everything will die.
1:15. I want to kill it.